Sourdough is my entire personality, but you need to stop baking with your starter, and I'm going to tell you why. And no, I don't mean that you need to stop baking sourdough entirely. Sourdough is great, but what you do need to do is make your process more efficient. So stop baking with your starter and start baking with a leaven. I am Adriana, and I have taught thousands of people how to make incredible bread on Instagram and in my course. And I'm going to do a little bit of explaining the difference between starter and leaven right now. Starter and leaven are the same thing, you just use them differently. So starter is the mother culture, and I keep a very small amount. I keep 10 grams starter that I feed 50 grams flour and 50 grams water. So that means 110 grams of total starter. Now, I generally am feeding my leaven at a 1:2:2 or 1:3:3 ratio. So your leaven is just a tiny little offshoot starter that you're using specifically for your bread. Keeping 110 grams of starter gives me enough to either make 4 or 6 loaves of bread with leaven. So it gives me enough starter to make leaven for that many loaves. If I'm doing a 1:3:3 ratio, that means that I can get 6 loaves worth of leaven out of it, because I would use 30 grams of starter and feed that bigger. So it would be 30 grams of starter to 110 grams of flour and 110 grams of water. Now that gives me 250 total. Or I can break that down and do 50 grams of starter and 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water. That would give me 4 loaves worth of leaven. Either 4 or 6, and that is so much bread. That's in one day you can do that. That's on one feed. That's a lot of bread. I don't bake every day anymore. I don't want to have to bake every day. I make enough bread that I don't need to. And I think most people don't want to have to make fresh bread every single day. If you want a really in-depth dive into all of this stuff, I will link my course below. It has incredible value. All right, so I'm going to feed some of my starters right now. I have 2. I don't normally suggest having 2, but I have one that is made with fresh milled flour, and then I have one that is commercial bread flour. So I have Mildred, she's fresh milled, and then I have Agatha. So it's been a day or 2, maybe 3 since I fed them, and this is not what I preach, but life happens, and that's okay. And as long as you understand how it works, that's when you can kind of fudge with the rules. So reality is, no, I do not 100% take care of my starter the way that I teach. I teach so that you can understand the rules so that you know how to break them. So starter and leaven. Starter in my house is what I would consider the mother culture. I don't normally bake with my actual starter. I keep a smaller amount of starter because it's less overwhelming to me. If I just have a little amount and then I can make offshoots, which becomes leaven, then I don't feel like I'm wasting. I don't feel overwhelmed like I have to bake because I have this active starter. And you're keeping a smaller amount, so you're using less flour, you're using less water. You have a smaller quantity of discard, but still enough that you can do a lot of discard baking. I love discard baking. I make the world's best discard chocolate chip cookies, and I would literally feed starter so that I would have enough discard to make those cookies, because the discard makes them so much better. I have a whole discard cookie ebook and a book of like more random discard recipes. I will link those below. They're amazing. Anyway, I love discard. I am in no way saying discard is bad, but I also don't like to be overwhelmed with discard. So this allows me to have a steady stream of discard without having tons of discard. What I do is I do 10 grams of starter to 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water. That is a 1:5:5 ratio, which means that it's going to take a little bit longer to peak and get bubbly and active, but it also means that it won't sit hungry and it will keep it stronger than if I were to do a lower ratio and have it sit hungry for a while. And also, I don't have to feed it multiple times a day to keep it really strong. You could do a lower ratio, but in order to keep it really happy and healthy and for it to leaven your bread optimally, you would have to feed it multiple times a day. I don't have time for that. I have 4 kids. 4 kids and a husband and a job, so I'm not going to do that. I would prefer to just feed it one time before I go to bed. It seems like a lot, but really it takes 2 seconds. It's not long at all, and once it's like part of your routine, it's totally fine. It's like negligible. You don't even have to think about it. So I have 10 grams. It's actually 15, but it's fine. We're just going to go with it because there's a lot of wiggle room in sourdough. It doesn't have to be exact, but I do know that because I did 15 grams, it will probably peak a little bit faster if I'm doing another 50 flour and water. So I always do my water first because it's easier to mix in. So I'm going to do 50 grams of water. So that's 50 grams of water, and this is Agatha, so this is my commercial flour starter. And I'm going to do 50 grams of organic, unbleached bread flour. You can do all-purpose. I just do bread flour because it's easy to have it in one jar. And I like the consistency that it gives, and it will stay at peak longer. And there's this movement in the sourdough world right now where people are wanting really thick starters. Now, a lot of times they're changing up the hydration, so it's not a 100% hydration starter, and what a lot of people don't know is that is actually changing the flavor and the pH of your starter, which is fine, but you have to understand that it is a different thing than the starter that a lot of recipes are calling for. I like 100% hydration starter because it is super versatile. You can do the sweetbreads, and you can also do the sour breads, and you can do everything with it instead of being kind of limited. But I like the consistency that it gives. It's very strong when you do it with bread flour, so it has that thick, sticky consistency without changing up the hydration and the pH too much. Whoops. So I'm just mixing it all up. I love this spatula. I will link it below. Honestly, it is like the biggest game changer, probably one of the most used things in my kitchen. So you can see how thick it is. It's not falling out. I mean, it would eventually, but it's thick. It's not going anywhere. Now I'm kind of particular about my jars. I do feed into a clean jar every time that I feed. So it prevents the jars from being really hard to clean, prevents your starter from getting mold. A lot of people kind of scoff when they hear that I change it every day. It's not more work. It's really easy and actually keeps me from having to sit and scrub my jars for forever or from me getting any mold in my starter. So that is Agatha. So now that Agatha is fed, I have a jar with a little bit of discard in it. So I'm going to put that in my discard jar. But first, I'm going to feed Mildred. And I didn't need a leaven with commercial bread flour, but I am going to make a leaven with Mildred. So I'm feeding her and making a leaven. Have my jar. This is my favorite jar. It's the Weck Tulip jar. I was really anti getting these jars for a long time because they're not cheap, but I love them. I have not used my regular ball jars in a long time because I love the shape of these. It's just easier. I just love them. Who knew at 26 I would be raving about jars? I need a leaven. It is kind of late in the day and I want it soon, so I am going to do a 1:2 ratio. So I'm going to do 50 grams of starter and 100 grams of flour and water. I still have a little bit of bread flour on my spatula. I don't care. It's not that big of a deal. So I'm just going to get some of my freshly milled starter. It's thicker, the texture. This is still 100% hydration, but just because of the nature of the flour, it is thicker. So I just scoop it out because it keeps the jars cleaner. There we go. That's 50. And now I'm going to do 100 grams of water. I'm doing 100 grams of this freshly milled hard white wheat. I prefer mine to be pretty fine. Okay. And then I'm just going to stir this up. And this is going to have a very different consistency than my commercial flour starter. When you're switching from from commercial to fresh milled, It is a very different product. There she is. It's thick. It'll move around, but it's not like liquidy. And fresh milled flour takes longer to absorb all of the water, so it'll be a little bit before it starts to rise, and that's totally okay. So this is my leaven. This will be ready by bedtime so that I can make a loaf right before I go to bed. So now I'm going to feed Mildred. So we're going for 10 grams of starter. Oh, right on the money. I love when that happens. And then we're going to do 50 grams of water. And 50 grams of flour. There's a chicken pecking at my back door. And if you happen to be on my HOA board, no, there's not a chicken pecking at my back door. So we're just mixing that up. And now I have my starter and my leaven made. And this prevents me from having tons and tons of discard. It prevents me from ever running out of starter because I use most of it when I'm baking. You always have a backup, but you're not ever overwhelmed with the amount of starter that you have. If you know you're going to have a busy week, you can put your starter in the fridge. There's so many different ways to handle it. But I highly recommend using a leaven because it's way less overwhelming. It seems like more working parts, but it's actually way easier. Did you get hurt? Oh, I'm so sorry. That is why I think you should stop baking with your starter and start baking with a leaven. It is essentially the same thing. It just is a more efficient way to do it. If you don't want to do it, that's also fine. You can totally continue to do it how it works for you. But if you're not feeding at a high ratio, you should change that because that is one really huge game changer. I get messages probably twice a week from people that it said, oh, I resisted changing my ratio for so long, but I didn't realize how unhappy my starter was. It is a huge game changer. If you want a happy starter that's going to leaven your bread optimally, you need to change your ratio and make sure that it's nice and happy. So, have a wonderful week and happy baking!